granularity. They want that, oh yeah, and I'll tell you the day it's going to be done, right?
Right. Yeah, so we spent all that time up front estimating all those tasks, and then a lot of times we either didn't get to them or priorities changed. But it took so many months to get to that number that, you have to sort of weigh the value of having that number that you knew was going to change anyway. And then you could always blame the change request or the customer or the people for whatever went wrong, which is kind of not what we're trying to do here with Agile. So, but it is a challenge because people still want that date without all the work. So I've tried to show version burn-up reports, and this is the depth of the backlog, and this is the area of uncertainty, but they still end up, really fixated on when can I have it? When can I have this? Even if they know it's going to change.
Yep, absolutely. Like, give me the date. Give me the date. For sure.
A date. I actually went to a little. It was like an all-day little conference a couple of weeks ago, and someone asked that question, and the guy's like, "Yeah, you need to make commitments even if they're wrong." So he was basically, and he goes, "You can make up for it later, so you need to, as a consultant, make commitments." And I was like, wait, did he just tell everybody to lie and then apologize?
Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten to the habit now of, I found that because we kept getting pressed for, got to give me a date, got to give me a date, got to give me a date, that I've started from the very beginning saying, I'm about to give you a bad estimate. We don't have enough data, and even putting in my presentations, no data supports this estimate, right? You're getting a project up and running, and so I just kind of prep them with, I'm about to tell you a date, but it's based on no data, and it's really bad. And we know that because we're at the beginning of the project. Nobody knows. We don't have, 2 weeks or 4 weeks of history. We're just getting started. So I've found that prefacing it with bad, people haven't taken it to the bank as much as before when I said, here's an estimate. They said, great, that's your promise. You will deliver by that date. And turns out that's not what I was saying at all.
Right.
I see Jeff joining us, but you're muted there, Jeff, in case you're trying to say something, but no problems. And again, welcome to everybody.
Yeah, can you hear me?
There's Jeff. Howdy. We can hear you, sir.
Hey.
And we've got Mike on the phone,
Great.
too, calling in from a totally different time zone than us. But we'll get him introduced here in just a second and going. We'll give about 2 more minutes, let people join in as they start to trickle in here.
1 more minute now. Correct. Isaac and Jeff started this lovely journey, coaching Agile journeys. I happened to hop in one time because I think I saw it on Slack, and I joined in, and we kind of partnered up to have this coaching Agile journeys. We do webinars about once a month, so we're really excited because Michael Hannon is here today, and Michael has done some really great things, and he is going to impart some knowledge upon us today.
For sure, yep. So let's talk real quick about what we'll be getting into. We'll go ahead and kick into this. What we'll be doing today is just getting people joined in, which is what we're doing. Kickoff, which we're actually going to try to give Mike as much time as possible. So we're going to jump right into getting Mike going. And then we'll have the main topic and some Q&A, and then we'll close out and try to give everybody a bit of time back as we start to wrap up. So do want to encourage everyone to use the Q&A feature. If you can find it there in WebEx on the panel, you'll be able to see a Q&A feature. You can put your question there, or you can throw it in chat. And Jeff, Heidi, and I will be watching out for the chat as we go through the talk, and then we'll come back with the questions towards the end. This is just a little bit about who we are, Coaching Agile Journeys. We're just here to advance our journeys together. And it's a great community. Email there. Our website is Coaching Agile Journeys if you want to join us, and we've got our emails here in this slide. But like I said, today is, and Heidi introduced the topic of Michael Hannon is going to be speaking to us on 3 high-impact techniques to accelerate projects. And so, Heidi or Jeff, did I miss anything before we hand it off to Mike?
No, one thing, just to tell you the power of that Agile journey and the power of a network. I kind of let everybody in a little bit of backdrop. I'm kind of going through a journey change at the moment, that coaching path, and Heidi has become just a real good mentor, a good personal coach, as is Isaac, but I got to talk to Heidi a little bit one-on-one this week, and little did Heidi know my kids were in the car with me as I was talking to you. And I got off the phone, and my kids are at a very impressionable age, around 8 and 13, and they just heard how powerful our conversation was and how moved I was and how you've kind of like revitalized my spirit. And for kids to see that in an adult is a very important thing. And they were like, what was that all about, Daddy? And I said, that is the power of good networks and being surrounded by good people. You were telling me all the things that I needed to hear, not all the things that I wanted to hear. And you were also helping me come to self-realization. So for my kids to be able to see that and learn and understand what having good peers and good coaches and good networks are, just makes that Agile journey all the more powerful. So I just wanted to share that with everyone. That's epic.
Thank you.
Well, Mike, I'm going to pass the ball over to you, and I will say, as he's getting up and running, for me, Mike is one of these people. He'll tell you a little bit about himself, but I'll just say that, goodness, hearing Mike's content and the things that he's been able to share through conversations with him, he's been one of those who has helped me kind of bring together some thoughts that had been floating around through nether space. So, Mike, looking forward to hearing from you, and going to hand the ball off to you. It's all yours.
Hey, awesome. Thanks, Isaac, Heidi, Jeff. Appreciate it. I'm pretty thrilled with this Coaching Agile Journeys group, too, because when I first talked to Isaac and Heidi about speaking to you all today, they made a big point about we don't want to just give the same old plain vanilla, straight up the middle stuff that you learn in your Scrum Master class or that you might read in your typical Agile 101 book. We really are more interested, they said, in learning about how to adapt and apply techniques that might not necessarily have originated in Agile, but tend to blend nicely and might actually enhance the methods we already have, strengthen the mindsets that we're trying to foster on our teams, in our organizations, and maybe reach for ever higher performance levels. So that's what I'm all about, especially when it comes to project space. Quick little snippet on who I am and where I come from. I started out life as a traditional project manager at NASA, doing some pretty traditional waterfall type projects. Some were
We might have lost your audio there, Mike, just for a second. Oh, you're back. Sorry, we lost there for a second. You're just getting into your background at NASA and you cut out.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now. You're clear as a bell.
Cool. So anyways, I morphed into the software and IT world. I began doing a lot more iteration and spiral-based development, things like that, back before the word Agile was coined. And so I've been struggling for 25 years, if not more, to try and pursue ever higher levels of speed, ever higher levels of reliability by blending some of the goodness that we do have in traditional project management while still trying to overcome some of the challenges and roadblocks that it's presented as well. So with that, I'll dive into it. One quick housekeeping note. I do have a bit of a cough. So if suddenly in the middle of the presentation you hear a dead pause, it's just me putting myself on mute so I don't cough in your ear. Sound fair? Okay. So I'm going to make a promise to you all, and that is to inspire and excite you on this topic. Now, it sounds like if you're already a member of Coaching Agile Journeys, you probably came inspired and excited. If you're dialing into this webinar, same thing. So I thought, it's not sufficient to just leave you that promise. Let's go for a wild-eyed stretch goal. And so my wild-eyed stretch goal is to actually help you maximize your impact as leaders for the purpose of advancing humankind. And, I've spoken to many groups, hundreds of people at some of these events, and talk about, I ask people, what do you think are the highest impact fields known to man? And they'll throw out a bunch of fields, and we'll list them, the top 10 or so. And then I'll ask people to stand up if they work in one of those fields and typically about a third of the room stands up. So, you know, a lot of times we don't always feel every day like we're in the highest impact fields, but when you start to really think about the impact you can have just by going to work every day and elevating performance of your teams and your organization, I'm quite serious about this wide-eyed stretch goal. Okay, so the title was 3 high-impact techniques, but let's start with not just techniques. Let's start with what I mean by when I say high impact, because it's a term that's thrown around a lot, right? And it kind of gets worn pretty heavily. But for me, I'm thinking, you know, sky's the limit kind of stuff. So for those of you who might be history buffs, you might know that the evacuation of Dunkirk in 1940 was the largest U.S. evacuation in the history of humankind. But on 9/11, there was an even bigger one to rescue nearly 500,000 people trapped in lower Manhattan. So if you look at just this throughput improvement of 35 times more, so you're already at massive scales here, right? Largest ever in history. But not only are we largest, we are 35 times faster than the next largest. And so if you look, you can check my numbers for those of you who want to Wikipedia some of this. The Dunkirk rescue took 9 days and rescued 339,000 British and French soldiers. In 9/11, they rescued almost 500,000 people in just 9 hours. So that kind of throughput improvement, you know, doesn't just happen by accident. If you're curious to learn a little bit more about it, you know, please don't do it now during my sessions, but you can you know, YouTube search this Untold Tale of 9/11 Resilience, that YouTube image I show on the right there. And I've also given a keynote speech, more than a few keynote speeches on that topic. I've had the great privilege of interviewing Captain Michael Day, shown there, of the U.S. Coast Guard. So you can check out videos of presentations I've done on that subject. It's pretty incredible. That's one example of high impact. Here's a couple more. This might seem at first glance to be a little bit more mundane or day-to-day, right? Just we're talking about a pharmaceutical company. But think about the life-saving impact if you can double the number of drugs you bring to market. Life-saving drugs without actually increasing any cost. Think of the impact you can have with that. I was fortunate enough to have some direct experience with that organization as well. I did not work directly for Amazon, but some of us are probably familiar with some of these metrics. They went from deploying software less than 10 times a day to more than 7,000 times a day. So to visualize that, if one little Amazon logo A there equals 10 times a day, this is what they went to get to more than 7,000. So I think you're probably getting the drift here, but let's throw in one more. This is a favorite one of mine. In its first 8 years, SpaceX, they did something that NASA, you know, even though I'm a proud former NASA employee, NASA have been trying for decades to get the cost per pound to low Earth orbit down. The Russian Space Agency, same thing. The Chinese Space Agency, same thing. European Space Agency, same thing. All government funded with billions and billions of dollars, and a for-profit commercial entity started up in 2002, a total latecomer, right, to this game, and within the first 8 years not only made a profit, but made space launches 5 times less costly. So again, if you look at the trajectory, yeah, you know, the whole world was slowly but surely working those costs down over, you know, 40 years or so. But if you look suddenly at 2010, which is about 8 years into SpaceX's existence, suddenly the cost went down dramatically. And it's continuing to go down dramatically, largely because of SpaceX. Okay, so question, of course, is how do they do it? And while I've not gotten up close and personal with the CEOs of every single one of those 4 examples, or the Coast Guard leader, I have interviewed the Coast Guard guy. I've worked for one of those other examples, and I've done a fair amount of research on the other 2, and it's a bit of a puzzle. I think I've cracked the code, but if you think about it, all would have had to have inspirational leadership. But I don't know about you, I've worked for a lot of inspirational leaders, and they're not always high-performing organizations. So clearly, it has to be more than that. In this case, each of those 4 examples all had a strong sense of urgency, but again, I've seen a strong sense of urgency in other organizations as well, and they're not always high performing. So again, there's something else that has to be in the mix. 2 of the 4 I showed had some sort of formalized Agile methods. Not that I could call them disciplined performance improvement cultures necessarily, but definitely some sort of formalized Agile method to try and speed things up and deliver more reliably. But again, the other 2 did not. And then similarly, 2 did have internal performance improvement initiatives, but then not the other 2. So that's interesting. So here's what I've found to be the common denominators. And there are a few. Inspirational leadership. You could also include good strategic thinking in that. I mentioned the strong sense of urgency, of course. Something I call unbridled enthusiasm for unlimited upside. When the Coast Guard captain rescued almost 500,000 people in 9 hours, you know, he just thought there was going to be a second wave attack coming. So he was just saying, I don't know how long it'll take me, but I'm going to go as fast as I possibly can. I'm going to maximize speed as much as possible. The SpaceX guys, when they talk about their unbridled enthusiasm for unlimited upside, they're talking about making humans a multi-planetary species. In fact, that's their company mission. The making a profit is just sort of the means to the end for them. Kind of cool. Something a lot of the Agile communities I speak with and a lot of the Agile teams I coach tend to poo-poo is the need for sound planning. I think it's so unfortunate because the waterfall experience basically, you know, a lot of us who have had experiences in waterfall, we spend weeks or months planning, and then things change so fast anyways, it's kind of like, what was the point? So I would say spending weeks or months planning for something that's going to change is not sound planning. That's overkill planning for, you know, not very good bang for the buck. But certainly there's a place for sound planning, even in the Coast Guard rescue of the 9/11 folks. They actually paused before launching the rescue attempt to plan. It's also interesting to note that in a similar initiative to rescue a whole lot of people back in Hurricane Katrina with New Orleans, they didn't do a whole lot of sound planning there. So hopefully you get my drift. And then we're going to get into some stuff that basically gets into what we're going to talk about today, right? Staggering according to capacity. What does that mean? We're going to talk about that, how that boosts speed. We're going to talk about single task focus and how to try and codify that. And then this other thing that sounds kind of strange, none of these 4 examples I gave earlier committed to anything that they considered lower level. There was one high-level objective, and that's the only thing they had any commitments on. Anything else like a sprint level commitment or a task level commitment, that's noise. Let's not commit on something that actually doesn't deliver value to the customer. So these last 3 things are going to be the focus of this webinar. The key, though, is let's codify them as techniques, right? To just say, hey, go get focused. You know, work one task at a time and stay focused. You know, easier said than done, right? In the modern organizational environment, that is almost impossible to imagine in some cases. So we're going to codify these 3 things in the next 30 minutes or so, maybe even faster if I can, and hopefully you can walk away and be able to apply them. Okay, so let's dive into it. Number 1, if you imagine a simple project, again, I've oversimplified dramatically here, but imagine there's 3 types of tasks, and even if a typical Scrum team might partake in all of these A, B, and C, you know, I've done it so that there's some dividing line here, right? So, for example, you probably don't want your developers doing user acceptance testing. So even though they'll participate in that phase, it's a different resource mix. So if you'll go with me on this rough category of ABC resources, and imagine you've got a very small team of these 3 resources. It could be 3 little teams. But regardless, we could do the simple little project in 7 weeks really reliably. The question is, if we had 3 projects, which is great, right? We always want more than just one so we don't get laid off at the end of it. How long would it take us to do 3? And Agile has actually gone a long way helping solve this problem. But I don't know if Agilists map it out the way I'm about to show you. So again, there's this illusion of progress if we actually try to jump and bounce from one project to another so that all stakeholders can see at least some progress going on. Yeah, I'd say the Agile world has done a lot to fight against this this problem, because we insist on dedicated teams, right? And we insist on keeping the team intact. But again, even in Agile organizations, I've seen plenty of examples where you still pull like your top architect off of the team to go put out a fire somewhere, or to go help lock down the design for some other team that's struggling. And so there ends up being this desire for a dedicated team, but there's still this delay effect that I'm showing here. And of course, everyone's busy. So it feels like, you know, how could we possibly do any, go any faster? Right? We're already quite busy. So if we were to simply stagger things according to capacity, in this case, it's the capacity of resource B, since that's the most, their tasks tend to be the most time intensive, the way we've mapped things out here. We see that if we just stagger and start according to when resource B will be available, even the last project to start here will finish 4 weeks earlier than it did up top. And boy, that first one finishes a whole lot earlier. And oh, by the way, without adding resources, we can get a 4th project in there. And if you look at the resource profile below, we see little gaps between resource A's duties and resource C's duties. You know, that idle time there can be used to try and find creative ways for the team to experiment with how we might lighten the load of resource B. How might we improve the handoff to resource B or from resource B? How might we prep things for resource B so that things go much faster? And we might even get a 5th project in there. Cool, so I can tell you that the organizations that I've consulted with that only do staggering on, let's say, even a project portfolio as small as like 10 projects, they normally see somewhere in the order of 30 to 40% jump in the number of projects they complete per year. I had one organization use this technique and the single tasking technique I'll get to in a moment, and they tripled the number of projects they got done in a year. And they were already an Agile team before all this. So pretty cool. Okay, so that's already technique number 1. Just a few key takeaways here. Oh, by the way, I will be providing a PDF copy of these slides for anyone that might want to just kind of have it as a handy reference. I think these key takeaways are kind of with that in mind. So if you want to remind yourself later, you know, what did that Mike Hannon guy say back in April? You've got it here. Yeah, so obviously we've got to convince some stakeholders that, you know, if I'm the stakeholder of project number 3, you're going to start me off 6 weeks later than I'd prefer. I need to really be convinced that that's going to be a good thing for me, right? But certainly something we can accomplish. Similarly, we exposed that resource B was our big issue. For those of us who've read the Phoenix Project, there was a resource character in that book named Brent, who was basically a one-person resource B bottleneck for the whole company. That was obvious for them. It was such a chaotic and bad issue. It's not always quite as obvious for many of us, though. In fact, I'll say probably every single one of my last 3 or 4 clients, they found that the bottleneck was a subject matter expert on the business side of the organization. It was not their senior architect. It was not the Brent resource. It was not the technical wizard. It was outside. So now that once you understand that that's your system, and you can stagger according to the capacity of that person's capacity, then you can really begin to optimize and focus on ways to improve things. Okay, and then obviously just making sure everyone's highly utilized can't be the goal, because throughput has to be the goal, right? We have to get more projects done. That's how we deliver more value. That's how we respond to changes in the market more quickly. That's how we hit due dates reliably when the value proposition of our projects is due date sensitive. That's how we do it. Okay, pardon me, I just had a little cough there. Let's dive into technique 2. This is actually my favorite one, and it's one that tends to blend most naturally to a lot of Agile and Scrum teams. It's on single tasking, and so, again, I want to codify this, though. I don't want to just say, hey, let's get focused. That's not good enough. So in order to codify it, I have to start measuring what the improvement actually is when I'm focused compared to when I'm not. So I will provide this score sheet for any of you who want to play this game with your teams, but basically what you're looking at is round 1 with task switching, we see alphabets, numbers, and shapes. You don't have to use Roman numerals with your teams, but some people find it a little more challenging and fun. And basically round 1 is you just go row by row. So you'd write in the letter A, then the number 1, and then a rectangle, and then you go to row 2. And you write the letter B and the number 2 and a circle. And you keep going row by row until you're done. And when you're done with all 3 projects, you mark the time. Then for round 2, you just do A through Z, 1 through 26, and the repeating shape pattern, and mark your time. And here, I've done this, I would say, probably with well over 2,000 people now. And here are the typical results I see time and time again. So you see the first round when you're going row by row and switching, you see a spread there of that speed, anywhere from 90 seconds. I've had actually some people take 4 or more minutes. So it really has a tail on it that kind of stretches out to the right. And it averages a little over 2 minutes. And then when you're actually focused and just allowed to go zipping through it, it's a much tighter spread, much more predictable execution. And if you compare the 2 means there, you're talking about almost a doubling in speed. I did this with actually, I have twin 18-year-old sons, and trying to get them focused on their homework a couple of years ago, I made them take this, play this game, and they both actually got more than double. So it actually helped them ponder whether they really wanted to turn their cell phones off when it was time to focus. So the question I had when I started looking at the results of this game was, okay, these are very simple tasks. They do not actually require much focus. I mean, we all know our alphabets and shapes and numbers. So the cognitive, mind is not really fully engaged on those tasks, and we're still doubling our speed. It must be a much more dramatic speed gain if we're doing something that actually requires cognitive skill. So I did another test. One of my twins got really good at these puzzles. I could never solve any of them. And obviously after he solved the 3x3x3 cube and kind of mastered it, he could actually carry on a conversation while he was solving the puzzle. He'd be slower than he would be when he was focused, but he could still do it. But as the puzzles increased in complexity, any little interruption at all really threw his speed off big time. And so I actually asked him about a year ago. I said, would you mind giving me a couple hours of your afternoon on a Sunday, and let's time you. And I timed him when he was alone in his room with no interruptions, completely focused in an optimal environment that he set for himself. And then for round 2, I just interrupted him about every 30 seconds with just some silly question, like, have you done your homework, or did you clean up your room, or whatever. And he showed just like the game I showed on the previous slide, he showed about a doubling in speed on the simple cube there. And as you can imagine, it got to be about triple, quadruple, 6 times, 8 times. And that last shape there, I never knew the name of a 12-sided polygon. My son taught me that it's called a dodecahedron. So if you're ever in a trivia game and that comes up, you can thank me. So the dodecahedron puzzle, drum roll please, 12x. I really felt bad for my son. He was in there for quite a while trying to solve that puzzle when I was interrupting him. So the question is, especially in software, but any knowledge work environment, you know, to what degree are our people working on simple puzzles versus the dodecahedrons? And if only our best people even know how to do the dodecahedrons, we're actually slowing down our best people a whole lot when we interrupt them. So let's take that forward then and codify it. A little bit of concept first. I'll start with some lean and Kanban stuff. I'll zip through this because I assume most folks have at least some exposure to this. Again, just visualizing flow helps. Applying some sort of pull system, so you basically allow people to assign themselves their own tasks when they feel ready. Keeping batch sizes down, which in my mind is just another way of saying don't juggle too many tasks at the same time. The human brain is designed to handle one at a time. That tends to marry quite well with the lean concept of single piece flow. And then similarly, this notion of work in progress or WIP, keeping that within capacity of any system, whether it's a highway system for traffic or the number of projects you're trying to flow through your organization. But again, when it comes to the human brain, we already know that the ideal WIP target is one task at a time. That's keeping things within capacity for the human brain. So we basically have 2 or 3 reinforcements here of single tasking coming from lean. The astute observer might have noticed on the intro slide that I'm a theory of constraints Jonah. If you don't know what that is, you can Google it. But basically, it's a body of knowledge that looks into how to improving flow. Again, for those of you who read the Phoenix Project, there were some interesting theory of constraints concepts sprinkled in there, which is kind of fun to see. And they've been saying for 30 years now that single tasking is the way to go. It wasn't just them, right? I put psychology there because there's psychology studies going back decades. And then, of course, they're also talking about making sure you're doing it where it counts. So kind of like where I said, you know, the bottleneck sometimes is outside the Scrum team. So you could optimize the speed of the Scrum team and everything's still slow because you haven't really sped things up where it matters. And then the last thing, of course, Agile and Scrum. Again, I think Agile and Scrum reminded us of some things that psychology studies have been pointing out for a long time. And these are actually more from the Scrum side of the equation about how the team, once you get a team involved with these sort of disciplined ways to help codify single tasking, the team can challenge themselves to figure out ways to improve flow. The team can figure out whether paired programming makes sense and run some experiments. The team can figure out whether it makes sense to have a senior guy and a junior guy team up or to work separately, and even when. You know, the team can experiment with all kinds of ways to improve flow if you let them. And of course, when you let them, they're a whole lot more motivated, and when people are more motivated, they of course work faster. The key though is they have to have this discipline framework, some way to codify single tasking, some way to help them see how close or how far they are from true single task discipline. And that's what I'm going to get to on this next slide here. If you look at a typical Kanban board, or just in English, it's called a task board. And you just have a very simple setup of 3 columns here. And these cards are all just work items, tasks, waiting to be worked. Basically, it's just saying, well, if you look at the doing column, your team has six items being worked. And so the question is, well, if you have, say, a 3-person team, that means you're not single tasked yet. It might not be bad necessarily, but it means you need to keep striving to get closer and closer to that nirvana of single task focus. So keep striving to make this number lower than the number of people you have working. And again, you can then optimize it further from there with, say, a paired programming approach or some other way to team up and have, you know, 2 people or 5 people or some other number of people collaborate on certain tasks. Again, not for the purpose of collaboration, but for the purpose of maximizing flow. So in practice, I've had very, very few organizations actually get that number down to what I would call true single task discipline. But it sure is great when they start, when they see like, wow, we've got like 11 tasks open per person on average. You know, what can we do to get that down to 8, and then down to 6, and then 5, and keep striving toward this number here, toward this this optimal single tasking ratio. So one organization, again, just proof that you don't have to be perfect in order to get some pretty dramatic gains. What you're looking at here is a cumulative flow diagram. If you're not familiar with it, the light blue is just the accumulated task completions over time. Any Kanban or task board tool that's that's a technology or software tool will normally generate this kind of diagram for you. And the dark blue is the actual WIP, or the number of open tasks at any given moment. And so if you look, these guys benchmarked or baselined their previous productivity level, and they had quite a few problems trying to get the hang of things here. Right, quite a few impediments came up. But even with all those impediments, they started getting more productive. And then when they really got that WIP worked down closer and closer to single tasking, that light blue slope got really nice and steep. And interestingly, that zone there on the right, that steep area, they were still averaging about 2 open tasks per person, not 1. So it just goes to show, like, they could keep on going and keep steepening that curve, getting higher and higher. So in this case, they doubled their productivity, and they did it all in just a couple of months. So again, it kind of opens up some interesting possibilities for where we can go from here. So if we look at these together now, staggering and single tasking, they do tend to go well together. And we went from 3 projects to 4 with staggering. Imagine you didn't improve by double or triple or 12x or whatever. You just assume something still pretty significant here, right? 35% speed improvement, which pretty much every one of my client organizations is able to achieve within a few months. You can actually jack your project throughput up from 3 to 4 to 7. So now we're more than doubling the number of projects we're getting done with just 2 techniques. Pretty cool. In fact, I think I mentioned earlier, one client did just these 2 techniques and tripled their throughput in just 1 year. That was pretty cool. So again, a few takeaways for you. Again, this is more for the PDF copy that you can take with you. But the thing I like about this is you don't, I've used this with teams of mainframe developers on traditional waterfall methods. I've used this with Scrum teams. I've used this with, internally baked, systems development lifecycle methodologies that I didn't even fully understand, right? But just single tasking is just inherently human. And so, you don't have to go get your Scrum Master. You don't have to subscribe to any methodology. You just have to believe in the power of single tasking and using actual data to show you whether you're improving flow or not. Having said all that, of course, it does tend to complement Agile. Client did something quite interesting. They actually decided to do away with their sprints altogether because they felt like it was just an experiment, right? They weren't sure if it would work, but they felt like every time they got to the end of a sprint, they would interrupt people. There'd be half-finished stories. People would have to wrap up the tasks from a day or 2 earlier to package them up, to show to the customer or stakeholders. And they felt like if we could only get closer to continuous flow, single-piece flow, and then still find, frequent moments where we can share what we've done with fewer interruptions, maybe that'll be better. So it kind of offers that option. For them, it worked quite nicely. I've had other teams say, no way, we love the cadence of our sprints. We think it's really great for our teams. But again, kind of nice that it's sort of at your option. And again, the range of improvement is quite wide, and I think we can all guess why, what characteristics we might see in the 300% improvement organization versus the 30. But the nice thing is even, the 30 was like a slow, old school, large, plotting, let's just say mature industry company, right? And they still got 30, which for them was great. Okay, let's hit right into technique 3 here, and we'll see if we can open up for some questions. This one is kind of cool, I think, because it's basically dealing with the variability inherent in execution with knowledge work, right? We don't always know how long something's going to take, how many story points we're going to really be able to do per sprint. even when we have a pretty good stable velocity on a pretty intact, mature team, people have good days and bad days. Sometimes half the team comes down with the flu. Sometimes, people resign, take other jobs, you got to onboard some new guy. And so even velocity that you think might be stable is going up and down on an almost daily basis, depending on what's going on. And so this is an attempt to capture the variability using a simple dice game. So basically what I'm showing here is the probability of rolling a 6. So if, the probability of rolling a 6 on the first roll is 1 in 6, which is that, 17, I rounded it up to 17% there on the left side of this curve. And so if you actually did do the statistical calculations on this, so hopefully you'll trust that I do them correctly. But basically, if I try to roll a 6 in 2 rolls or less, it would be 31%. 3 rolls or less, it's 42%, and so on. So again, if I'm looking to ask you to commit, like I really need you to tell me how many rolls it will take you to give me that 6. I'm really counting on you delivering. People will always look to at least 12 rolls, often 20 rolls. I've had people ask for 30 rolls, because of course there's no guarantee that even, 1,000,000 rolls will generate the 6, right? Because this curve just goes to infinity. But if you look at a measure of central tendency, which is, let's call it the mean here, right around 4 rolls is the 50% point. So half the time I'll be able to deliver you that 6 in 4 rolls or less, and half the time it'll take me more than 4. Obviously, sometimes when it takes me more than 4, it could be quite a bit more than 4. So just like in project space, if something's late, it could be quite a bit late, but not always quite a bit early. So the question is, how do we take the variability inherent in knowledge work and aggregate the risk that's there to the highest levels possible? So that's what I'm going to explain with this slide here. I'm going to use a traditional task duration estimate here, and I'll convert it to story points per sprint once the concept is clear. So again, responsible task owners or scrum teams, they understand this inherent uncertainty, and they're very careful not to overcommit, right? If they're going to commit to something, yeah, they want to commit to something that's lofty and something they'll be proud of, but they don't want to commit to something that they're going to fail on half the time or worse. So they might take 5 days worth of work and ask for 10, right? If my reputation's on the line, I better build in some safety there. And of course, if everyone does that on a traditional project plan, we got 20 days of variable work that ends up resulting in a 40-day plan. So again, if you apply this concept to velocity commitments, and there's actually a couple of interesting blog posts that others have written on this, as well as me. We've all, hopefully, if we're experienced enough, we've been in a situation where, we're gung-ho, we put big commitments down, and we miss them, and then we feel bad, and then we dial them back a bit. And then we also start to wonder, like, well, but we know we've done better than this, so we shouldn't have to just pace ourselves to something that we know we can do better at. It's just we don't want to commit to something better. So the point here is freeing people to go at the fastest sustained pace they can and to work that pace faster and faster that they really can sustain without worrying about these commitments. So again, some of the same dynamic here. If we have delivered something incredible in the past, suddenly our bosses expect it in the future. Which makes us quite nervous because then it becomes an unsustainable pace, lots of overtime and stress and weekends and all sorts of crazy stuff to make it happen when things aren't going so well. But if we could just run, right, like a relay race runner, we got 4 guys handing the baton off. They're going to have good days and bad days, but let's just let them run. We could find this 20 days of variable work. Maybe we put a 50% buffer. This could easily be like the feature backlog of desirements or nice-to-have features. We could just work really quickly through the core work, the must-haves, and then give ourselves flexibility to reach for those ever higher performance levels. It gives us all a chance to over-deliver, maybe by a lot, while still being very careful with the level we're committing to. Cool, so then put all this together into my throughput picture here. Let's assume just by doing this, eliminating commitments, you get a 33% speed improvement. In practice, that's actually about right. Some teams get 50% or higher. Other teams, maybe it's more like 20. So I kind of went for some midpoint here. And you see we went from 3 originally to 4 projects to 7, and now we're at 12. So I'll admit to you, I've yet to help a client or any project portfolio anywhere actually quadruple their throughput yet, but I'm getting close. And ooh, by the way, we still see there is some resource gaps. So we still have some opportunity there to keep working resource B's tasks to be faster. We have some idle capacity there to brainstorm handoffs and help improve the entire flow of the whole system. All right, so some key takeaways here. This is just what the insurance industry has been doing for hundreds of years. Right, we're saying the thing that matters, which to the customer is just when the project is delivered, is what we're going to focus on, and that's where we're going to buffer things. The individual sprint level commitments or task level commitments or whatever are not what the customer cares about typically. So we put in place these commitments for no real good reason. We think it's holding people accountable, but in fact it ends up really stressing teams out when things aren't going so well, and it encourages pacing, which obviously means we're going to deliver less. So let's just have them pursue ever higher velocities rather than pace themselves. We already have a feature backlog in Agile, which gives us a nice buffer. I call it a scope buffer. In this case, it just gives us higher upside potential. And I have seen some speed improvements that go as big as double. I'll admit, not often, but it has happened. So we're talking about some big high-impact stuff here. Okay, I'm almost out of time, so let's open up Q&A in a minute here. But to get started on this, if you're interested, I do offer what I call a 30-30 guarantee. I won't go into the sales pitch too much here, but it's basically the techniques work so well that I'm now so confident I'll just guarantee a 30% speed improvement in 30 days or less. Again, you can read the details. I'll have a link coming here in a minute. I can do and have done larger scale, but that tends to be a little bit more effort. It takes a little bit more than 30 days typically. One vendor that I've partnered with, LeanKit, actually has a 30-day free trial of their task board, so it tends to align well with that time period. And there's the details there. Some free resources to learn more. I've written about some of this on my blog. If you want to subscribe to my newsletter, I don't send any more than like one per every month, sometimes every 2 months, so I will not spam you. This is not free, but I've kept it as cheap as I can, where I've codified some of the concepts you've heard today. And then I really do like some of the resources that this vendor LeanKit has as well. Some very interesting blog posts, also on single task focus. And you can find out more by going to those links. Again, I'll be distributing all this in PDF for those who want a copy and want to be able to click on the links and go. So you have to copy them down now. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Awesome. Wow, Mike, thank you so much for that. And as I'm taking back control here, and we'll do a few Q&As, I definitely want to tack on to what you're saying about your book. I've now read it twice. And when I say read it cover to cover, I have referenced it many times. It's a short read, and specifically there's one chapter where you break things down, and it's incredibly valuable. So I highly recommend anybody who wants to kind of get into this process deeper, highly recommend that. So I've got a couple of questions for you. Again, open it up to anybody. If you've got a question, put it in the Q&A box, or you can just put it in the chat, and we'll try to get that over to Mike. Let me give you a couple of these here that I've got already. Have you ever seen, you were talking about some major, massive multipliers improvement. Have you ever seen a publicly traded company reach those levels of 20x or higher or do you notice a difference between publicly traded or perhaps more private companies? Have you seen any difference there? What's the greatest improvement that you've seen to date with these practices?
So in my experience, the larger the organization, the longer it takes to kind of get things rolling. And I think that a lot of us here on this call who've been doing the Agile thing for a while probably have that frustration. In fact, Isaac, I know you've shared privately some of your own challenges, right?
Yes.
So certainly size can be an impediment. However, you'll notice, like SpaceX, they're not publicly traded. They're a privately held company. The U.S. Coast Guard obviously is not publicly traded, right? But that 9/11 rescue was certainly a unique situation. The pharmaceutical firm I mentioned is publicly traded. They achieved it, and of course Amazon is too, right? So I think it has more to do with, do people actually follow the inspirational leader that has to be there and their message of, like, this is really urgent, and we have to constantly challenge ourselves to get better. And it has to be a meaningful goal, right? I mean, for Elon Musk to say we want to become a multiplanetary species, and I want it in my lifetime, right? This is what he says. There's a real sense of urgency there, and the notion of, hey guys, how might we experiment with ways to get ever faster? And that one question there I found is the most powerful driver of all. If the teams finally kick in a practice on their own, without my help, without the boss telling them to, of just asking themselves, how might we? And I don't even care how that question ends. If it starts with how might we, you're on your way to these kinds of improvements.
Excellent. That's a great answer. So speaking of this kind of culture and that idea of how might we, what would you say an inspirational leader you defined as one of the kind of core elements across these that have improved? What does an inspirational leader look like? What are some of the qualities you see in that? If you could just really quickly kind of touch on that.
The thing I like the most, or that I think is the most powerful with the leaders that are most effective in this regard, is they find a way to make your everyday, mundane tasks just seem crucially important. So again, if I'm working for a car company, all right, I'm proud of the craftsmanship of the car that I'm helping to produce, and I'm glad that the market has a demand for it, and that our sales are hopefully healthy, and all that is great. But to think like I'm working for Tesla and I'm trying to help move us away from fossil fuels, that might carry a little bit more meaning. And the leaders make sure to capitalize on that. And so I think it's a big mistake a lot of leaders make. One company I consulted with, all they did was produce mannequins. They produce mannequins for department stores. But that can be, you can inspire people with a really good mannequin. Like don't just say, well, we're just, we're on the bottom of the food chain here. We're just kind of pumping out these plastic whatever. Make it important. It's important to people for a reason. There's a market for it for a reason. Help people see it. Make sure as a leader you connect it directly to what people's tasks are every single day.
Excellent. That's really powerful. And I just came across a recent blog article and a post of the Disney leader. And when you're talking about making the small things seem crucially important, one of the things they focused on at Disney is we're going to be a very clean park to let people come and have those wonderful experiences. And so they made picking up trash a powerful step. And so all of the staff believes in picking up trash, and just what you're saying there is that inspiration that makes the smallest tasks seem valuable. Let's get you another question here. So how do you answer the objection to single task flow of the concern of people having idle time? I think whenever I've discussed this with people, that the first thing people say is, well, we don't want people sitting around. And if you do single task flow, you're going to have people sitting around. How do you handle that when that's raised?
Well, I think if all you want to do is keep people busy, we can always put more tasks on the to-do list, and people can always grab the next task so they're never idle, right? So keeping people busy, I think, if that's the goal and you're still having trouble keeping people busy, there's something really wrong, right? But when we talked about staggering, that's where we saw the gaps of idle time. In my example, in the cartoon project plan or the portfolio, it was resources A and C had some idle time gaps there, right? In reality, I don't know about you, I've never seen a project environment where people are just sitting there idle. So in my mind, I'm saying, look, you might not have a key task that's got to happen in order for this project to succeed, but we do want your mind asking the how might we questions. We do want you wondering, not just wondering, we want you experimenting, coming up with ideas for how to shrink the cycle time of resource B's tasks and to offload some of the effort from resource B onto yourself if you can. And so to really get the minds of the organization engaged on those kind of challenges, that's what people tend to complain they never have time for. Who has time to improve things around here? I can barely get through my task list. Well, I think if we stagger things properly and we build in some of the idle time that inevitably will happen, it's not really idle time. It's time that people use to ask the how might we questions.
Excellent. Excellent. I'll throw one more question to you, and then we'll wrap up here. How can a team move from 2-week sprints, so they're doing their 2-week sprints, they're typical, and into this continuous flow idea? How would you help transition? You know, you're used to your 2-week cadence. Let's do it now just as a continuous flow. How might you help them?
So one of the key steps that has to take place first for it to work at all is you have to get with your stakeholders and say, hey, if we make this change, can you play along? And if they say, well, no, we really like the every other Friday thing, that's our cadence, we've built everything around it, we don't want to risk changing anything at all, well, then you might want to think twice, right? But if you said, hey, what if we scheduled a standing meeting every Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and if we have something packaged up and ready to show you, then we'll make sure that we'll just have the meeting. And if we don't have anything packaged up and ready to show you, we'll send out an email at 4 p.m. the day before and let you know. And you can just get that half hour or hour back in the morning and, sleep in. And typically, stakeholders have responded quite favorably to that. Because they're like, you know what, if we do the standing meeting thing, if we make it a priority the same way we made the every other Friday a priority, we can actually have more regular feedback sessions, more frequent, and do it only when it's meaningful and when it doesn't interrupt the team. If that kicks into gear, then the continuous flow tends to work quite well.
Awesome. Mike, I love how you're touching on all the mindsets, and it's not so much about do this, do that, but it's shifting the mindsets. And so thank you very much for this presentation and for helping us to see the value of shifting those mindsets. As we're closing in on the end of the hour, we have about 1 minute left. I wanted to tell everybody that our next meetup is going to be on May the 17th. We're going to have Fred here with us. He's going to be talking about showing real progress. So what are some ways that you can measure and show real, actual progress in your project as you're going forward? If you have an idea or want to help with a future meeting, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us at coachingagilejourneys.com, subscribe to our mailing list, and we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. So for myself and Heidi and Jeff, I want to say thank you for joining us, and we will see you guys all at our next meeting.
Mike,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Michael. Man. Awesome.
Absolutely amazing, yeah. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. Thanks, y'all. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.